They left a newborn prince on a frozen mountain and told the kingdom he was stillborn. 15 years later, that prince can copy any ability he sees, and he's coming home. His name is Kael Ashford, first son of the Ashford royal bloodline, heir to the Crimson Throne. Except nobody knows that because his family erased him the night he was born. The reason was brutally simple. In the Ashford kingdom, every royal child is tested at birth for elemental affinity. Fire, the ancestral element, the mark of true Ashford blood. His older twin brother Darian blazed with crimson flames the moment the priest touched him. When they touched Kael, nothing happened. No fire, no spark, no warmth. Just silence and a baby staring up at the ceiling with calm gray eyes. The king looked at his flameless son and made a decision before the cord was cut. This child is defective. Take it to the mountain and leave it. The queen tried to protest. The king silenced her with a look that carried more threat than any blade. A royal guard named Manhwa was ordered to carry the baby to the summit of Echoes, a frozen peak where the kingdom abandoned things it didn't want found. Manhwa climbed the mountain in a blizzard, holding a newborn against his chest. At the summit, he was supposed to leave the child in the snow and walk away. He couldn't do it. Not because of loyalty, because the baby looked at him with gray eyes that didn't cry. A newborn, freezing, abandoned, and those eyes weren't afraid. Manhwa wrapped the child tighter, turned his back on the kingdom, and kept climbing. Not down the mountain, over it, to the other side, where a hermit named Old Gregor lived in a cave carved into the rock. A former court mage who had been exiled decades ago for questioning the king's judgment. Gregor took one look at the baby, one look at Manhwa's face, and understood everything. "You want me to raise a discarded prince," he said flatly. "I want you to raise a child," Manhwa replied. "The prince part is his problem, when he's old enough to deal with it." Gregor agreed because old hermits in caves don't get many visitors and fewer surprises. A baby was both. For the first 5 years, Kael grew up thinking he was an orphan found in the snow. Gregor taught him to read, to hunt, to survive in a mountain environment. The old mage also taught him basic mana theory, expecting nothing. Because a child without elemental affinity shouldn't be able to use magic at all. Then one afternoon, Gregor demonstrated a simple fireball spell to show Kael what magic was. Kael watched the old man's hands, the mana flow, the compression pattern. Then he raised his own small hand and produced an identical fireball. Gregor's pipe fell out of his mouth and shattered on the cave floor. "That's not possible," he whispered. "You have 0 elemental affinity. I tested you myself." But the fireball was hovering right there, perfect, identical to Gregor's in every way. Kael tilted his head and asked if he did it wrong. Gregor spent the next 3 days running every diagnostic spell he knew. The results were the same every time. Kael had no innate elemental affinity, no natural magical talent, nothing on any standard test. But he could perfectly replicate any spell he saw performed. Not learn it, not adapt it, copy it. Frame by frame, mana signature by mana signature, a perfect duplicate. Gregor ran to his reference library, a stack of crumbling books older than the kingdom. After 2 days of frantic reading, he found a single mention buried in a footnote. Mirror resonance, an ability theorized but never confirmed. The capacity to absorb and reproduce any magical technique through observation alone. No affinity required because the ability itself was the affinity. The reason it had never been confirmed was simple. Anyone born with it would test as elementally null exactly the way Kael did. And in a world that judged worth by what element you were born with, elementally null meant worthless, disposable, mountain trash. Every mirror resonance user in history had probably been killed or abandoned at birth, before anyone discovered what they could actually do. Gregor sat down heavily and stared at the 5-year-old eating an apple in the corner. "Your father threw away the most powerful magical talent in recorded history because it didn't look like fire." He decided on the spot that Kael would learn everything Gregor could teach him. Not just magic, combat, strategy, history, politics, everything. Because a boy who could copy any ability he saw needed a foundation strong enough to use them. For the next 10 years, the Summit of Echoes became the most intense training ground. Gregor demonstrated every spell in his repertoire, and Kael copied each one perfectly. Fire, ice, wind, earth, lightning, water, light, shadow. Every element that normally required a specific bloodline affinity. Kael wielded them all because his ability didn't care about bloodlines. It cared about observation, precision, and the willingness to watch carefully. By 8, he could cast spells that academy graduates struggled with. By 10, he could combine elements in ways Gregor had never seen. By 12, his raw power exceeded his teachers. Not because he was inherently stronger, because he had copied so many techniques, that the sheer volume of his toolkit outmatched any specialist. A fire mage has fire, an ice mage has ice. Kael had everything he'd ever watched anyone do. Marin visited once a year, always in disguise, always with news from the kingdom below. Each visit painted a darker picture. Prince Darien had grown into exactly the kind of ruler the kingdom didn't need. Arrogant, cruel, obsessed with his fire affinity, and utterly convinced of his divine right. He burned anyone who disagreed with him. Literally, using his flames as punishment. The queen had retreated into silence after losing the child she wasn't allowed to mourn. The king had become paranoid, purging anyone who questioned Darien's fitness to rule. And the kingdom's borders were weakening as neighboring powers sensed instability. When Kael was 13, Marin brought the worst news yet. Gregor's name had appeared on a purge list. The king was cleaning up old loose ends, and an exiled court mage who knew too many secrets was exactly the kind of loose end kings like to cut. Kael asked Gregor what they should do. The old man puffed his replacement pipe and said something Kael would remember forever. You can run from a king, or you can become the reason he can't chase you. I suggest the second option. From that day, Kael's training shifted from learning to preparing. Not for revenge, not yet. For survival, which in a kingdom ruled by a man who abandoned his own son, required becoming something that king couldn't afford to destroy. On his 15th birthday, Kael stood at the edge of the Summit of Echoes, looking down at the kingdom that had thrown him away like defective merchandise. Behind him, Gregor was packing a travel bag with the efficiency of someone used to running. We could stay up here forever, Kael said. We could, Gregor agreed. But you won't, because you're not the staying type, and we both know it. Kael took one last breath of mountain air. Then he walked down, into a world that had no idea what was coming. The first city Kael entered was Thornwall, a border town 2 days south of the mountain. He registered at the Adventurers Guild using a false surname and no listed affinity. The registrar looked at the blank affinity box and sighed. No elemental affinity, you'll be limited to physical labor quest, hauling, guarding, cleaning. That's fine, Kael said. His first job was escorting a merchant caravan through a forest known for goblin ambushes. The other escorts were a fire mage, an earth shielder, and a swordswoman named Vera. Vera was the only one who treated the NULL kid as something other than dead weight. Stay behind me if anything happens, she told him without condescension. Something happened within the first hour. Goblins, 20 of them, pouring out of the tree line with crude weapons and sharp teeth. The fire mage panicked and threw a fireball so wild it nearly hit the merchant's cart. The earth shielder raised a barrier but positioned it wrong, leaving the left flank open. Vera charged into the gap, blade singing, holding the line alone. Kael watched her swordsmanship for exactly 4 seconds. That was all he needed. He drew the short sword he'd brought from the mountain and moved. Every technique Vera used, the footwork, the blade angles, the parry timing, Kael replicated with mechanical precision, covering her blind side. They cleared the goblin pack in under 2 minutes, working in perfect sync. Vera was breathing hard when she turned to look at the NULL kid standing beside her. Covered in goblin blood, short sword steady, not even winded. Where did you learn a fight like that? She asked, voice careful. Kael cleaned his blade on a goblin's shirt. I watched you, he said honestly. You just learned my sword style in 4 seconds? He shrugged. Your footwork is excellent. The blade angles need minor adjustment on the backswing. But overall, very clean technique. Vera stared at him like he'd just told her the sky was green and proved it. The fire mudge and the earth shielder were still picking themselves up from their own failures. Neither of them noticed that the NULL kid had just performed a rank swordsmanship, which was exactly how Kael wanted it. The mission completed without further incident, and Kael collected his pay. But Vera followed him out of the guild hall. I don't know what you are, she said, but no NULL mage fights like that. I'm not a mage, Kael replied, which was technically true in the way the kingdom defined it. I'm just observant. Vera didn't buy it, but she also didn't report him. Instead, she offered to partner up for future jobs. Kael accepted because he needed the cover of a legitimate adventure team, and because Vera's sword style was genuinely impressive. He wanted to see more of it. Over the next 3 months, Kael and Vera built a reputation as one of Thornwall's best duos. Vera handled the combat, Kael handled strategy and what she called impossible adaptability. Every fight they entered, Kael came out with new techniques absorbed into his arsenal. A bandit's throwing knife trajectory, copied. A mercenary captain's shield bash timing, copied. A wandering monk's pressure point strikes, copied. A beast tamer's monster calming technique, copied. His ability didn't just work on magic, it worked on any learned skill. Martial arts, crafting techniques, even musical instruments. Anything performed in front of him became permanently part of his repertoire. Vera noticed that Kael improved after every single fight, not gradually, but in visible jumps. She confronted him about it over drinks one evening. You're copying people, she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Every fighter we face, You absorb their moves and add them to your own. Kael considered denying it, then decided that Vera had earned honesty. Yes. How? I see a technique once, and I can replicate it perfectly. It works on magic too, not just physical skills. Vera set her drink down very carefully. That's why you tested as null, she said slowly. Your ability isn't tied to any element because it doesn't need one. Kael nodded. If the kingdom knew, they'd either weaponize me or kill me. Probably both, in that order. Vera was quiet for a long time. Then she raised her glass. Your secret is safe, and for the record, you still need work on your backswing. From that night on, they were real partners. Vera actively demonstrated techniques for him to copy, turning their sparring into training. She introduced him to high-ranked fighters passing through town specifically so he could watch. Within 6 months, Kael's physical combat library rivaled the martial arts grandmaster. And his magical library, fed by years of Gregor's teaching plus every image he observed, was something that shouldn't exist in a single person. Fire, ice, wind, earth, lightning, water, light, shadow, healing, barrier, spatial, temporal. 12 full elemental categories, each with multiple techniques, all available on command. No specialist could match his depth in their own element, but no specialist could switch between 12 elements mid-combat either. That was the terrifying advantage. Whatever you did, Kael could counter it because he already knew how it worked. He'd watched someone do it and absorbed the counter along with the technique. The word got out eventually, not about the copying, but about the null kid who won everything. Quest after quest, rank after rank, Kael climbed without ever revealing magic in public. He fought with sword and strategy and what people called inhuman adaptability. The Adventurers Guild promoted him to B rank within a year, their fastest ever for a null. Then the kingdom came knocking, not looking for Kael specifically, looking for recruits. The Royal Military Academy was holding open enrollment for promising adventurers. A recruitment officer arrived at Thornwall and Kael's name was on the candidate list. Not because anyone suspected who he was. Because a B-rank null adventurer was a statistical anomaly worth investigating. Kael could have declined. He could have run, disappeared back over the mountain, lived quietly with Gregor forever. Instead, he enrolled. Because the academy was in the capital. And the capital was where the king who threw him away held court. Where the twin brother who got everything he didn't train to be emperor. Where the mother who lost him lived in silence. And where the answers to every question he'd carried for 15 years were waiting. Vera enrolled with him because partners don't split up at the interesting part. Her words, not his. The Royal Military Academy was everything Kael expected and nothing like he'd imagined. 3,000 students from across the kingdom, ranked by elemental affinity and combat score. Fire affinities at the top, obviously. Null rankings at the bottom, a category that functionally meant fetch my lunch. Kael's assigned dormitory was in the basement. Because of course it was. His first combat evaluation paired him against a mid-tier fire mage named Soren. The instructor told Kael to try his best and not get hurt too badly. Soren threw a fireball the size of a wagon wheel. Kael sidestepped it, closed the distance into steps, and put Soren on the floor. With a shoulder throw he'd copied from a wrestler in Thornwall 3 months ago. The gymnasium went quiet. Then Soren got up, angry, and launched 3 more fireballs in rapid succession. Kael dodged all 3 using movement patterns copied from 4 different fighters. Then he tapped Soren on the forehead with 2 fingers, the monk's pressure point technique. Soren's legs gave out and he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The instructor stared at his clipboard. The clipboard didn't have a category for what just happened. No candidates weren't supposed to defeat fire mages. They weren't supposed to move that fast either. Kael helped Soren up, released the pressure point, and walked back to his position. No showboating, no gloating. Just an old kid standing, where he was told to stand after beating a mage who outranked him. The second evaluation was weapons proficiency. Kael scored perfect marks with sword, spear, bow, staff, and hand-to-hand. 5 disciplines, 5 perfect scores, from a student with 0 listed combat training. The weapons instructor demanded to know who had trained him. I watch people, Kael said. The instructor didn't know what to do with that answer. By the end of the first week, Kael had become the academy's most confusing student. Bottom ranked by affinity, top ranked by performance. A null who fought like a veteran and adapted like nothing the instructors had seen. The fire affinity students, led by Soren's friends, decided this was unacceptable. 5 of them cornered Kael in the basement corridor after lights out, ready to teach the null his place with fist and fire. Kael dropped all 5 in 11 seconds using techniques copied from their own classmates. He left them in a tidy row along the corridor wall, unconscious but unharmed. Vera found them the next morning and laughed so hard she woke up the entire floor. The confrontation that mattered came a month later. Prince Darien visited the academy for the annual royal inspection. All students were assembled in the grand hall as the crown prince walked through in full regalia. Crimson flames danced along his shoulders like living decoration. His face was sharp, handsome, and wore an expression of total superiority. Kael stood in the back row with the other NULL students and looked at his twin brother. The same face as his own, minus the arrogance, plus the gray eyes instead of crimson. They were identical in structure but completely different in expression. Darien carried himself like someone who had never been told no in his life. Kael carried himself like someone who had survived being told no at birth. The prince requested a demonstration fight, and the academy's top student was selected. A lightning affinity prodigy named Alara who had been undefeated all semester. Darien crushed her in 40 seconds, his crimson flames overwhelming her lightning. Not because he was more skilled, because his raw power output was simply higher. Royal blood carried denser mana, and Darien had been fed enhancement elixirs since birth. He stood over the fallen prodigy and addressed the crowd. "This is what real power looks like," he said, flames flickering along his arms. "Not talent, not effort, birthright. Remember that." Kael's hands tightened at his sides, not from anger at the words, from the cold recognition that this was the person the kingdom chose over him. A bully with a bigger flame and a smaller mind. As Darien walked past the NULL students, his gaze swept over them like they were furniture. It paused on Kael for half a second, just long enough for something to flicker in the prince's eyes. Not recognition. How could he recognize a twin he'd never met? Something more instinctive, a predator noticing another predator's stillness. Then he moved on, and the moment passed. But Kael filed it away. His brother had noticed him, even for half a second. The fire in Darien might not know the mountain, but it could feel the cold. Alara, the lightning prodigy Darien had defeated, found Kael in the training yard that evening. She was nursing bruised ribs and bruised pride in equal measure. "You're the NULL who keeps winning fights," she said. "I keep hearing about you." Kael was practicing a spear form he'd copied from the weapons instructor. "I just train hard." "No," she said, watching his movements with the keen eye of a real fighter. "You train different. Every time I watch you, your style has changed. Like you're a completely different fighter every week." She sat down on a bench, wincing. "Could you beat him?" she asked, and they both knew she meant Darien. Kael stopped the spear mid-rotation. "In a fair fight, probably." "Nothing about royal combat is fair," Alara said. "He has enhancement elixirs, ancestral weapons, and half the academy as his honor guard." "Then I'll need more than a fair fight," Kael replied. Alara studied him for a long moment with the same sharp assessment that Vera used. Fighters recognize fighters, and whatever she saw in his gray eyes convinced her. "I want in," she said. "In on what?" "Whatever you're planning," she said. "Because anyone who can say probably about beating a royal prince is either delusional or dangerous. And you don't look delusional." Kael's circle was growing. Vera, the swordswoman who saw through him first and stayed anyway. Alara, the lightning prodigy who'd been humiliated by Darien and wanted to fight back. Gregor, still on the mountain, sending encoded letters with political intelligence. Maren, the guard who'd saved him as a baby, now a retired officer living in the capital. Each one a person the kingdom had undervalued, discarded, or beaten down. Each one finding their way to a boy who understood that feeling better than anyone alive. Because Kael wasn't just a NULL kid with a broken system ability. He was living proof that the kingdom's entire value system was wrong. They measured worth by what element lit up at birth. They missed everything else. The skill, the adaptability, the resilience, the intelligence, the will. All the things that actually mattered in a crisis. Darien had fire because he was born with fire. Kael had 12 elements because he earned them, one observation at a time. The kingdom chose the gift, Kael chose the work. And the work was about to speak louder than any birthright. The catalyst came 6 months into the academy year. A dungeon break in the Western District, a C-rank rift that should have been routine. Except the monsters that poured out weren't C-rank. They were a rank corrupted beast, twisted by magic so dark it warped the air around them. The academy mobilized its senior students and dispatched them to the breach. Kael's squad was assigned to civilian evacuation, the lowest priority task. Because NULL students didn't fight, they moved furniture and scared children. But the breach widened faster than anyone predicted. The senior combat teams were overwhelmed within the first hour. A corrupted alpha beast, 3 stories tall with armor-plated hide, broke the containment line. It charged straight toward the evacuation zone where Kael's team was guiding families out. 200 civilians behind him, including children. No senior fighters between him and the monster. No backup, no plan, no time. Kael stopped pretending to be NULL. The first spell was fire, copied from Gregor, a compressed bolt aimed at the creature's eyes. The beast flinched and swung a claw the size of a door. Kael shifted to wind magic, launching himself sideways with a burst that cracked the pavement. Ice next, a barrier across the street to funnel the beast away from the civilians. Lightning, channeled through the ground to lock the creature's legs in place for 2 seconds. Those 2 seconds were all Vera needed to close from the flank, and all Alara needed to charge her strongest attack. 3 elements from Kael, 1 sword from Vera, 1 lightning lance from Alara. Synchronized without a single word spoken. The alpha beast crashed to the ground and didn't get up. The evacuation zone went silent. 200 civilians stared at the NULL kids standing over a dead rank monster, with fire fading from one hand and ice from the other. A NULL mage who had just used 3 different elements in 10 seconds, which was supposed to be impossible. The senior students arrived for minutes too late and found the beast already dead. The academy instructors arrived 10 minutes after that and found a political nightmare. A NULL rank student had used multi-element magic in front of witnesses. Either the ranking system was wrong, or the student had been hiding something enormous. Both options were terrifying for an institution built on elemental hierarchy. Kael was summoned to the headmaster's office before the dust settled. Headmaster Varens, a formidable woman with silver-streaked hair and ice affinity stronger than anyone in the kingdom, except possibly the royal line itself. She locked the door, activated 3 layers of privacy wards, and looked at him. 3 elements, she said. Fire, wind, and ice in a 10-second sequence. From a student registered as NULL. Explain. Kael weighed his options. The headmaster could destroy him, report him, hand him to the crown. Or she could become the most valuable ally he'd ever had. Everything depended on what kind of person she was. He decided to gamble. It's not 3 elements, he said. It's 12. Varen's left eye twitched. He demonstrated, quickly, cycling through fire, ice, wind, earth, lightning, water, then light, shadow, healing, barrier, spatial, and temporal. Each one a clean cast, each one identical in precision to the source he'd copied it from. Varen sat down very slowly. How long? She asked. Since I was 5. And nobody noticed? Nobody looked, Kael said. Because I tested NULL, and NULL means invisible in this kingdom. Varen's was quiet for a very long time. Long enough for Kael to wonder if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then she said something that changed the trajectory of everything. I've been headmaster for 22 years. In that time, I've watched this academy sort children by birthright instead of potential. I've watched brilliant students get buried because their element wasn't prestigious enough. And I've watched mediocre fire mages get promoted because their last name was right. She stood up and looked at him with eyes that burned brighter than Darian's flames. You're proof that the entire system is broken. What do you want to do about it? Kael told her everything. The abandoned prince, the mountain, Gregor, the mirror resonance, the twin brother. The kingdom that threw him away because his hands didn't catch fire. And the plan he'd been building since he was old enough to understand what was taken from him. Not revenge. Not the throne. Reform. A kingdom that valued ability over birthright. Where no kids weren't thrown off mountains and fire mages weren't handed crowns. Where what you could do mattered more than what you were born with. Varens listened without interrupting. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a file. Inside was a birth record, sealed with the royal stamp. To live births, twin males, first son displayed NULL affinity, disposed per royal protocol. She'd had this file for 15 years, waiting for the day the disposed prince came home. Kael stared at the file. You knew. I suspected, she corrected. A NULL baby disappearing the same night a guard deserts his post. And 15 years later, a NULL student appears who can cast 12 elements. The math wasn't difficult. From that day, Kael had a network. Varens provided institutional cover and political intelligence. Vera provided combat partnership and unwavering loyalty. Alara provided connections among the academy's top students who resented the hierarchy. Gregor provided strategic counsel through his encoded mountain letters. And Maren provided something no one else could. The name and location of every person in the palace who had opposed the king's decision. That night, 15 years ago, when a newborn was sentenced to die for not being on fire, not everyone had agreed. The queen's handmaid had smuggled the birth record out. The court physician had filed a formal objection that was quietly buried. 3 council members had voted against the disposal and been reassigned to distant posts. And somewhere in the palace, a mother who had never stopped mourning was about to learn that her son was alive. Kael didn't rush. He spent the next year building his position at the academy, rising through the ranks under Varen's protection, demonstrating abilities that shattered records. He won the inter-class tournament using only physical combat, keeping magic hidden. He won the tactical simulation exercise by predicting every opponent's strategy. because he copied their thinking patterns the same way he copied their techniques. His ability didn't just work on physical and magical skills. It worked on cognitive patterns, decision-making frameworks, strategic instincts. Watch a general plan a campaign. Kael could replicate the planning style. Watch an economist analyze a market. Kael could apply the same analytical lens. Mirror resonance copied everything, and everything included thought itself. By 16, Kael wasn't just the Academy's strongest student. He was the most complete human being the kingdom had ever produced. 12 elements, 47 combat styles, 11 strategic doctrines. All of it absorbed from observation, stored permanently, available instantly. A one-man army wearing a NULL badge and sleeping in a basement dormitory. The confrontation came at the year-end royal exhibition, where the Academy's top students demonstrated their abilities before the king and court. Darien attended as guest of honor, still riding the reputation of last year's demonstration. Kael was selected to fight the exhibition's final bout against Darien's personal champion, a knight named Garrus who had never lost a public match. The bout was supposed to be a formality, the NULL student losing gracefully to the prince's champion in front of the entire court, reinforcing the hierarchy, reminding everyone of their place. Kael walked into the arena and looked up at the royal box. His father sat on the left, face carved from stone, crown catching the light. Darien sat on the right, crimson flames playing along his shoulders like living jewelry. And between them, in a chair slightly set back, sat the queen, Kael's mother, the woman who had tried to protest 15 years ago and been silenced. Her eyes found him across the arena, and something in them shattered and rebuilt itself. She couldn't possibly recognize him. They'd never met. But the way her hands gripped the armrest told Kael that somehow, impossibly, she knew. Garrus entered the arena in full royal knight regalia, sword drawn, fire enchantment blazing. He looked at Kael the way a lion looks at a rabbit that wandered onto the savannah. Kael didn't draw a weapon. Begin, the announcer called. Garrus charged, sword trailing flames, every movement textbook perfect. Kael watched the attack pattern for exactly 1 second. Then he moved. He sidestepped the first slash using Vera's footwork, deflected the second with a palm redirect he copied from a monastery fighter, countered the third with Alara's lightning timing adapted to physical combat, and put Garrus on the ground with a throw that combined 3 different martial disciplines. The knight hit the arena floor, and his fire enchantment flickered out. The crowd didn't make a sound. Garrus got up, furious, and unleashed his full combat repertoire. Every technique the royal knights were famous for, 7 generations of refined swordsmanship. Kael copied each one as it came and countered with its own weaknesses. Because every technique has a flaw, and mirror resonance copied the flaw along with the form. In 3 minutes, Garrus was on the ground for the 6th time, breathing hard, sword arm shaking, looking at the NULL student with genuine fear. The arena was silent. Then Darien stood up in the royal box. His flame surged, filling the air with heat that made the front rows lean back. "Let me," he said to no one in particular, and jumped down into the arena. The crowd erupted. A royal prince entering a student exhibition bout was unprecedented and completely illegal. But nobody was going to tell Darien no. They never had. Kael watched his twin brother walk toward him. Same face, same build, same height. Different eyes, different fire, different everything that mattered. "You fight well for someone with nothing," Darien said, flames crawling up his arms. Kael looked at the brother who received everything he'd been denied. The crown, the training, the enhancement elixirs, the love, and saw, behind all that fire, a man who had never been tested, never failed, never struggled, never been told he was worthless, never had to build himself from nothing because everything was handed to him. "You fight well for someone who's never had to," Kael replied. Darien's eyes narrowed. Then he attacked. Royal fire techniques, the ancestral art passed down through the Ashford bloodline. Crimson flames that burned hotter than standard fire, fueled by royal mana density. The same fire that had defeated Alara in 40 seconds last year. Kael copied the first technique before Darien finished casting it. Identical crimson flames appeared in his own hands. The arena went deathly silent. Darien's face contorted. "That's not possible," he snarled. "Only Ashford blood can produce crimson flame." Kael looked at him with gray eyes that burned brighter than any fire. "Maybe you should ask father about that." The fight that followed lasted 12 minutes. The longest public bout in Academy history. Darien threw everything he had, every royal technique, every enhancement. And Kael matched him, move for move, flame for flame with copied precision. Then he started adding elements Darien had never seen. Ice countering fire, wind redirecting flames, earth blocking charges. Lightning stunning Darien's enhanced reflexes, shadow disrupting his spatial awareness. 12 elements against 1, each one deployed with perfect timing. The prince who had everything for the prince who had nothing. and the prince who had nothing was winning. In the royal box, the king was standing. His face had gone the color of old paper, because he recognized the crimson flame in the NULL student's hands, and he recognized the gray eyes that hadn't cried on the night they were supposed to die. The queen was openly weeping, not from sadness, from the 15-year-old agony of believing her firstborn was dead on a mountain, shattering into something that looked exactly like relief. Darian launched his ultimate technique, a pillar of crimson flame meant to incinerate. Kael didn't counter with ice or wind or any element at all. He copied the pillar, matched it with his own crimson flame, and pushed back. Twin pillars of royal fire collided in the center of the arena. The explosion of light and heat blew out every window in the building. When the dust cleared, Darian was on his back, flames extinguished, staring at the sky. And Kael was standing, barely, crimson fire still flickering between his fingers. The arena held 3,000 people, and not one of them was breathing. Kael looked up at the royal box, at the king who had ordered him left on a mountain to die, at the mother who had been forbidden to mourn. And he said 3 words that the amplification runes carried to every corner of the capital. I came home. The aftermath was a political earthquake. The birth record, unsealed by Headmaster Varens and authenticated by the court physician, confirmed that the NULL student was Kael Ashford, firstborn son and rightful heir. The king's disposal order was exposed, the cover-up documented, the lie unraveled. Maren testified before the council about the night he carried a baby over a mountain. Gregor's letters were entered as evidence of a 15-year exile. And the queen, speaking publicly for the first time in over a decade, described in measured, devastating detail what the king had done to her child. The king didn't deny it, which was somehow worse than if he had. He simply said the kingdom required strong heirs and the child showed no promise. Kael stood in the council chamber and responded with 5 words. I showed 12, want to count. The council voted to investigate the disposal order within the hour. Within a week, the king was stripped of executive authority pending formal review. Darian's claim to succession was suspended because firstborn rights superseded affinity rank. And Kael, the abandoned NULL prince, was officially recognized as the firstborn heir. He didn't want the throne. He made that clear to everyone who would listen. What he wanted was reform. The end of affinity-based ranking. The end of disposal orders for NULL children. An academy that evaluated students on what they could do instead of what they were born with. And a kingdom where a baby would never be left on a mountain because it didn't catch fire. The council agreed because the alternative was a civil war, and because the person asking had just defeated the crown prince using 12 elements, while registered as NULL. The argument kind of made itself. Kael delegated the throne to Reform Council and kept his position at the academy, not as a student anymore, as an instructor, teaching the same techniques he'd copied his entire life to students ranked NULL. Students the old system would have buried in basements and forgotten, each one carrying potential that the affinity test couldn't measure. Because affinity tests measure one thing, and people contain multitudes. Vera became the academy's combat instructor, the first non-noble in the position. Elara became the liaison between the academy and the Reform Council. Gregor came down from the mountain for the first time in decades, and was immediately appointed to the council as the kingdom's foremost magical theorist. He accepted the position under one condition. A comfortable chair, he said. I'm too old for the kind of furniture politicians sit on. Maren, the guard who carried a baby over a mountain, was awarded the kingdom's highest honor. He accepted it with the same quiet dignity he'd shown that night in the blizzard. And the queen, finally free to say her son's name out loud, walked into Kael's classroom one afternoon and sat in the back row without a word. He taught the entire lesson before acknowledging her. Not because he didn't care, because the lesson was for a room full of NULL students who needed to see their teacher focus. After the students left, she stood up. I should have fought harder, she said. Kael looked at the woman who had lost him on the worst night of her life, and found him again in the worst possible way, watching him fight her other son. You fought, he said. He silenced you, not the other way around. She crossed the room and pulled him into an embrace that was 15 years overdue. He let her, because some things don't need words. They just need time. And time, Kael had learned, was something you build with. They left him on a frozen mountain because his hands didn't catch fire. 15 years later, those hands could wield 12 elements, could copy any technique in existence, could defeat a royal prince in front of the entire kingdom, could hold a mother who thought her son was dead, and could write lesson plans for students nobody else believed in. That's the distance between what the kingdom threw away and what it got back. A boy they left on a mountain became the person who reshaped the mountain's meaning. The summit of echoes used to be where the kingdom abandoned things it didn't want. Now it's where the kingdom's most important person grew up. Kael didn't tear down the hierarchy with fire and rage. He did it the same way he learned every skill he had, by watching carefully, understanding deeply, and executing precisely. One copied technique at a time. One reformed policy at a time. One null student at a time. Until the kingdom looked around and realized the system was already different. Not because someone destroyed the old one, because someone built a better one right beside it. And people chose the better one on their own. The same way Maren chose to carry a baby over a mountain instead of leaving it. The same way Gregor chose to raise a child instead of ignoring a problem. The same way Vera chose to partner with the null kid instead of dismissing him. The same way Alara chose to trust a stranger's gray eyes instead of the system's ranking. The same way Varens chose to protect a student instead of her institution. Every person who helped Kael made a choice that the old system said was wrong. And every choice they made proved the old system was broken. That's how change actually works. Not through one dramatic revolution. Through 1,000 quiet choices made by people who refuse to look away. Kael stands at the front of a classroom now, not an arena. Teaching null students that their ranking doesn't define their potential. Demonstrating 12 elements to kids who were told they had 0. Watching their faces when they realized the system lied to them. And that the truth is much bigger and much more exciting than any single element. He teaches them the way Gregor taught him. With patience, with precision, and with the quiet certainty that they're worth it. Every one of them. The fire kids and the ice kids and the lightning kids and the null kids. All of them capable of more than a test administered at birth could ever measure. The kingdom tried to throw him away. He came back and made sure nobody else ever would be. Not with force, not with revenge. With a classroom and a lesson plan and the living proof that no means nothing. Except that nobody looked hard enough. Kael Ashford, firstborn prince, null rank student, 12-element prodigy, mountain orphan, academy champion, kingdom reformer, classroom teacher, stands at his desk as the afternoon light fills the room. Gray eyes scanning the faces of students who remind him of himself. Scared, underestimated, ranked at the bottom of a system built to keep them there. And he tells them the same thing Gregor told him in a cave at 5 years old. Watch carefully, he says, because everything you need is right in front of you. You just have to be willing to see it. Then he demonstrates a spell, and a room full of null students watches. And some of them, the ones who watch carefully enough, feel something stir in their empty hands. Something that no test ever measured, because no test ever thought to look. The kingdom abandoned a baby on a frozen mountain because his hands were empty. Those empty hands now hold 12 elements and the future of an entire nation. And they're teaching other empty hands that empty doesn't mean nothing. It means waiting to be filled with whatever you're brave enough to reach for. A guard carried a baby over a mountain in a blizzard. A hermit raised a prince in a cave. A swordswoman partnered with a null kid nobody else would trust. A prodigy chose to follow instead of compete. A headmaster opened a drawer she'd kept locked for 15 years. A mother spoke a name she'd been forbidden to say. And a boy who could copy anything he saw chose to copy the one thing that mattered most. Kindness. From every person who showed it to him when the kingdom said he didn't deserve it. From Marin's arms in a blizzard to Gregor's pipe smoke in a cave. From Vera's honest assessment to Alara's fierce loyalty. From Varen's open drawer to his mother's overdue embrace. Every act of kindness, copied, stored, and replayed in a classroom every single day. That's mirror resonance at its truest. Not copying fire or lightning or combat techniques. Copying the belief that every person is worth seeing. Even the ones the system says are null. Especially the ones the system says are null. They left him on a mountain. He came back and moved the mountain. Not with power. With proof that the boy they threw away was worth more than the crown they kept. And that every child born with empty hands deserves the chance to fill them. The classroom bell rings. Students file out, chattering, some of them already practicing in the hallway. Kael watches them go and feels the same thing Gregor must have felt. The quiet certainty that what you're building will outlast you. He picks up the chalk and writes tomorrow's lesson on the board. Because there's always more to teach, and the empty hands are waiting.